Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning, where we're going to take you through an update on the coronavirus and giving guidance and support for SMBs out in the UK. This is a broadcast, so for anyone that's not joined, it is part 3. So anyone that's not joined in the past, it is a broadcast, so we're unable to hear any of your questions via audio. I have got a screen on the next couple of slides that shows where you can add any questions. What we're going to do is try and get this into, and what we've done in the past as well in the last 2 webinars, is a bit more FAQ based. So in terms of timing, we've got it in for half an hour. It probably will overrun slightly, so if you are able to stay on the line, then great. If you have to jump off, you've got to leave, then that's fine. We can send out a recording so you won't miss any questions that have been answered at the end. So like I say, it is in for half an hour, but if you can stay a bit longer, then that'd be great. Hopefully you can see my screen. It should say HR Essentials. It should be a slide PowerPoint. If we just go on to the next slide and go into the agenda. The agenda for today's webinar is give you a bit of guidance and an update from the World Health Organization and the government, and an update from Boris's announcement yesterday, an update on statutory sick pay, and then also an update for business continuity, what businesses should be doing and should be carrying out from a business continuity point of view, and then we'll get to FAQ towards the end. As I mentioned before, any questions that you do have throughout the whole webinar, there is a questions box within the GoToWebinar software. So if you put in your question there, we'll hopefully get it answered at the end. If we're unable to answer it, because in the past couple of webinars we've not got round to answering every single one because we've got hundreds through, what we will do is during the course of this week we will come back to you with an answer. We'll be able to see who's asked the question, so we know who to go back to. But part of the webinar, I don't feel like you can't answer a question. We won't announce who's asked it. We'll just ask the question and hopefully get it answered by our experts today on the line. Before I get and hand over to our presenters, I just wanted to, and I'm not going to spend much time, we've just got one slide on who More Pay are, because we have got customers on here, but we've also got, we've opened it up to prospects. So we are a market leader in payroll and HR. Our promise is to make payroll and HR easy. Hopefully you'll get a bit of an understanding of how we do that from this webinar. We've been going over 50 years, got 10,000 customers, process 500,000 pay slips each month, handle around 12,500 payroll and HR queries each month. And together with our parent company, Zealous, who are formerly NGA, we pay 1 in 6 of the working population. And you'll see some of our customers' logos at the bottom there. I just wanted to just give you a bit of an overview of who we are for those that it's first time interacting with More Pay. So I'm going to hand over to, or introduce our presenters now. We've got Michelle Hobson, who's our HR Services Director. She joined More Pay in 2017. She's responsible for all our HR services team. That's both employment law and health and safety. She's got 15 years plus, both an operational and strategic HR experience, and fully CIPD qualified. We've also got on the webinar Phil Barker, who's our health and safety manager. He joined in 2008, 20 plus years experience in occupational safety, health, food safety and compliance, and he's a chartered member Institute of the Occupational Health and Safety. And then also on the line, we've got John Spooner, who we've drafted in to join the webinar because part of the budget last week was around SSP. So we're expecting there's going to be quite a few questions on SSP. So we've asked John to join. He's our expert around payroll legislation. So when we get to the Q&A, John will be available to answer any questions around SSP. So I'm going to hand over to Michelle first, who's going to take you through an update.
Thanks, Dan. I think since we did the webinar last Tuesday, things have moved on dramatically. So it's a good point to take stock and think where we are. We as a business are continually reviewing and monitoring the government advice that come out, and this is our main focus, is to ensure that we keep up to date so we can keep you up to date. Now, that is either through our customers who are ringing our advice line for practical advice on their specific instances, or updating our blogs and information on our website. For those of you who are customers on this webinar, if you do have any specific questions, whether it's around HR or health and safety, then please use the advice line. We are extremely busy at the moment, as you would imagine, but we are fully prepared for this, and as a business have been doing lots of preparation the last few weeks to make sure that we can sustain our operations. So please don't hesitate to get in contact if there's something specific that you want to ask. Moving on to more general points though, just as an update, as of 9 AM on the 16th of March, which was yesterday, and these are the latest government figures, 44,105 people have been tested, and 42,562 had actually tested negative. So there is still a large proportion of people who are testing negative at the moment. But to put the other figures in a realistic term, we now have 1,543 confirmed cases, and that has equated to 55 deaths across the UK. Last week in the update, the government estimated that the number of cases was much higher than this. They said at the time between 5,000 and 10,000 cases. But given that there are many people who are experiencing mild symptoms or are actually asymptomatic at the moment, they don't know what that number is. They have also raised the risk level to the UK as now high. And just as a reminder, I'm sure you all know this, but it's important that we just revisit this at every webinar, that the following symptoms may develop in the 14 days after exposure, and the main ones are coughing and fever, but also a difficulty in breathing. And there's just an illustration, then we all know this, but hand washing and good hygiene will help stop the spread of this. So in a timely update, I'm sure most of you have seen that yesterday, just before 5 PM, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson did an update which drastically changed the update that he had given on Thursday. So in the space of 3 or 4 days, things changed dramatically. And we wanted to take this opportunity just to run through the high level outcomes of this, because it can be quite difficult to understand exactly what was said yesterday and what it means. But in summary, everyone in the UK is being asked to avoid all non-essential contact with other people and stop unnecessary travel. This means working from home where possible, avoiding crowded places like pubs, clubs, theatres and restaurants. And he said that it's particularly important to the over 70s, people with underlying health conditions and pregnant women, that they follow this advice. Anyone who has cold symptoms, a fever or a persistent cough in particular, is now to self-isolate for 14 days with their entire household. So if you as an individual or one of your employees develops symptoms, then they need to self-isolate for 14 days. This is different from last week because it was 7 days. The reason that it's now 14 is because it gives 7 days for that individual's symptoms to alleviate, and then another 7 days to follow on from anyone in their family who they live with who may develop the symptoms as well. More specific advice for those with underlying health conditions will be coming soon and potentially this weekend. And the likelihood is that they will be asked to shield themselves from social contact for 12 weeks. We've also been told that it's particularly important guidance for London, where the cases are higher in terms of proportion of population than they are across the rest of the country. And it's a similar thing that is happening in New York. The government have said they will not support mass gatherings, and you will start to see that a lot of large gatherings like the Grand National have now been cancelled and will continue to be cancelled. And the government have kind of finished this off by saying that we're approaching the fast growth upward curve, and their aim with all this in place is to flatten that curve and allow the NHS to be able to cope with the situation as it continues. Trying to turn that into what it means for businesses then, we think it's really important that you review the makeup of the people who are working for you, identify who is vulnerable. I'm sure you're already talking to your teams about this, but it's important to continue that. You should have an idea of who is going to come into this category of potentially being vulnerable, because this isn't just about the over 70s, it's about anybody with underlying health conditions, and we will find more about that as the week progresses. It's encouraging people to be open with their concerns and making sure that they don't feel they will be penalised for raising their concerns. Put home working in place where it is possible, and we know this isn't possible for all businesses, and we're going to touch on that later, but where it is possible, you should be looking at making plans so that people do have to self-isolate, but they are not ill, that they could continue to support your business. You need to ensure that people follow their self-isolation rules, and if they present with any of those symptoms, that they and their household need to isolate. It'd be very tempting to think, oh, it's just a little bit of a cough, I'll come in. We really need to now be following the government guidance. SSP applies from day one, and shortly when we have the questions, we'll let John Spooner, our resident SSP expert, talk a little bit more about this, but this is something that we've been working on across Morpay and Zealous about how we help businesses handle this. I think it's important to seek specific advice if you have an ER or a health and safety issue that's impacting your business. Seek that professional guidance, whether that's from us or whoever you would normally use. And the main thing is to support each other. It's a very unprecedented time, and it's affecting each and every one of us, and we are all feeling the same, and it's important that as a business you make supporting each other a real priority to get through these next few weeks or months. I'm going to hand over to Phil now, who's going to talk in some more about the practicalities of working from home and business continuity.
So yeah, hello. Those people who were on the webinar last week, we touched on business continuity and how home working would fit into that. On the next slide, we're going to look about how you can protect staff that where you can't have them home working, but where it is possible for staff to work from home. We're hoping this is going to be a short-term, couple of weeks situation, whether it be that the government, whether you've got staff who are self-isolating for 14 days and having to work from home through that period, or whether people just follow the government's general advice to work from home. We're hoping this is going to be 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks worth of disruption. Obviously, if it moves to a longer term situation, we might need to review how we ask people to work from home. But where possible, advise employees to work at a desk with an adjustable chair, similar to what they've got in their office. Now, in reality, in a lot of situations, that's not going to be possible. So where that's the case, advise staff to use a table or a work surface that can be kept clear, where the laptop keyboard is at a similar height to their elbows when seated, so that you're not straining the back muscles too much. Ensure that laptop and other charger cables, such as phones, are routed away from walkways. The last thing we want is somebody's husband or kids tripping up over a wire and hurting themselves. Don't become strangers. I've worked from home for 20 years, and it's so easy when you're working from home to forget that you're part of a team. So make sure that everybody is in regular contact and everybody feels like they're still part of the team and the workplace is still a one-team situation. Use phone calls, online meetings, video calls. Obviously, smaller companies may not have this technology, but there are other things like WhatsApp and social media platforms out there that you might be able to use as a smaller business, just to make sure everybody everybody can keep in contact with each other. Don't insist that don't insist that your home workers stick to normal office hours. They'll be under different pressures at home. They may be looking after people who are ill. They might have the kids at home from school, might have pets, they'll have people knocking at the doors. So don't necessarily stick to a rigid 9 till 5, 8 while 4 routine. Be a little bit more flexible around start and finish times. If people have got long-term medical arrangements that may impact on them, then we need to look at this on a case-by-case basis. And we need to, where possible, encourage employees to create a commute to work. This is part of the separation between home life and work life. I'm on a group of quite a few self-help groups for home workers, as I've been doing it for 20 years. And one of the key things that people say is you need to have a separation between starting work and finishing work. A lot of people take the dog for a walk after they've had the breakfast and then come home and start work. and replaces the commute into work, so they can change the mindset from being a mother or father to being a worker, and necessarily do the same at the end of the day, so that you switch off from work and become back to home life. It's very difficult if you don't do that to separate work and home life. A big one is trust your employees. Daily calls and check-ins are not micromanagement. I had my first one this morning with my team who were home working, and it was all about a gossip. It was a check-in, how are the kids, rather than what are you going to do today for work. Keep that social element of work going through daily contact, but don't micromanage people. Obviously, as I said earlier, if these periods of home working extend, then we need to look at more home working risk assessments, making sure people have got the right desks and chairs. But let's just hope this is a 2 to 3 to 4 week period, and we can just get away with some simple common sense approaches to home working. So moving on to those who can't work from home. A lot of businesses need people on site. Manufacturing, people need to be on site to make things. Care homes, people need to be on site to look after residents, etc. One thing we can do is look at shift patterns to support social distancing. By that, I mean, can a group of people start earlier? Can a group of people start later, so that you've got less people in the office or in the workplace at any one time, so they can spread out and work a little bit further apart from each other? Ideally, we want to be trying to keep 1 to 2 meters away from people. Again, flexible shift patterns. People might need to go and shop to support others, elderly relatives or neighbours who are self-isolating. So a little bit of flexibility around how we expect people to work. Stagger lunch breaks, so we've got less people in the staff room at any one time. So maybe have one lunch 11:30, 12:30, another 12:30 or 1:30. Spread out as much as we can. Encourage frequent hand washing or gels. Just remember though, gels only work on clean hands. There's no point if you're in a manufacturing business using a gel on dirty hands. Regularly clean multi-contact surfaces such as door handles, shared keyboards, security pin access controls, etc. One key thing, make sure your employees are up to date on information. Anybody who's on Facebook, Twitter will know it's full of misinformation, it's full of bad news. So as part of protecting people's mental health, let's make sure they're updated on what is the correct guidelines, what is the correct information. Be vigilant for staff symptoms. And if you are in the care industry specifically, let's make sure you've got the right PPE, you've got enough soap, you've got enough alcohol wipes, enough gels. I know that's difficult to get hold of at the moment, but keep on top of your supplies so you don't run out. Encourage open conversations so that staff can share concerns and best practice. Again, similar to what I said this morning with my team of home workers, it's not necessarily about how they're getting on at work, it's about how they're getting on at home. Some people might have top tips or supermarkets that they know where people can get food. Just to encourage general conversations so people can help each other out. One thing is, what you do not want to do is take actions which encourage those with symptoms to come into the workplace. We don't want to be in a situation where somebody feels they've got to come to work even though they're showing the symptoms, because all that's going to do is potentially spread that around the rest of your workforce and put you in a worse situation 7 days down the line. We'll just move on to a little bit about mental health. We're going to probably look at mental health in more detail on a later webinar, but we just thought we'd touch on it now so you can start to get the groundwork in place. Slightly touched on this earlier. 24/7 news and social media would drive anybody off the brink. So encourage people to take a break and keep things in perspective. If they're still working on site, maybe change the TV channels to music channels and challenge rumour spreading and gossip. Be aware that for some, there's some real concerns themselves and relatives who might be vulnerable, and talk to people like we mentioned earlier. Where people are working from home, be mindful of the change of condition in a lot of places. People are used to working in a team, and now they're working at home. They can easily feel isolated. As I mentioned earlier, have regular conversations, team calls, video chats, daily touch points with everybody. Just so as managers or business owners, you can sense check how people are feeling and hopefully get on top of a situation before it explodes off. Well, it's probably a strong word, explodes, but evolves into something that's unmanageable. Fresh air and exercise is important, and the government have even said where people are self-isolating, there's nothing to stop you going for a walk as long as you stay away from other people. So encourage people to get out in the fresh air, stay in touch with people, even whether the people are ill, self-isolating or working. Just treat everybody the same. Stay in touch with them as much as you can. And similar to other diseases that we've had over the decades, coronavirus is nobody's fault. So do not allow any kind of bullying, do not allow any kind of name calling. There is no blame for anybody that has coronavirus. They've not gone out on purpose to get it. So just bear that in mind if you do have cases to manage in the business.
I think there's just one other thing that I would like to say. For those of you who've been on the other webinars, you'll notice that we'd previously spent quite a lot of time talking about the travel implications. We decided on this call, because things have progressed so much and we're facing a very real issue on the ground in our country now, that we would not focus on travel advice. But if you do need information, if you go onto the government website, there is still relevant travel advice that you can take.
That's great, thank you both. We're going to go through our Q&A now. So we've had quite a few questions come through. So the first one, the government web pages seem at odds with the Prime Minister's statement and are still advising 7-day isolation, not 14, which is correct.
Yeah, we picked up on that this morning when we were doing a last review run through these slides. We're taking the Prime Minister's statement last night as the source of truth, because that was immediately after the latest COBRA meeting, which is when the new plans will have been announced or decided. So we're presuming that the government are just in the process of updating the guide to employers on the web pages, and that Boris Johnson and his 14 days advice is what's going to be updated. As I said, that was immediately after the COBRA meeting when the plans will have been changed. So 90%, 99% even certain that that is the correct advice, and the government web pages will be updated today.
That's great, thank you. Another question, how do I know if my staff who are working from home are actually working?
That's a question that doesn't just fit across the current phase. It's something that is a general home worker question. It comes down to trust. Obviously, when you're in an office situation, you can see whether people are sat at a desktop, you can see whether people are working. When people are at home, there's an element of having to trust that they're doing the work. We've got to, as we mentioned earlier, have a little bit of flexibility, maybe change how you look at people's outcomes, my brain's going, how well people are working in outcome rather than the number of hours spent online. Are they actually achieving the number of calls or productivity outputs that you normally have, rather than how they sat at a desk from 8 while 4, 9 while 5. Allow the staff that flexibility and trust them to actually do a good job.
Yeah, thank you. Another question, does the more pay payroll system calculate SSP from day one? I'm going to ask John if you wouldn't mind answering this for us.
That is something that we are currently developing and testing. It is in progress.
Okay, thank you. We're getting quite a few questions on SSP. One question we got, if the company asks the employee to self-isolate, do we have to pay SSP from day one?
Yes, we should be paying SSP from day one. We've got to follow the government guidelines on self-isolation, and we need to pay SSP from day one. Now, it is saying that isolation should be for 14 days, so please relax all normal policies around getting sick notes and medical notes from doctors, because that will likely be impossible in the next few weeks. But you should be paying SSP from day one.
Okay, thank you. Another question we've got, part-time employees with health conditions who are required to self-isolate for 12 weeks, what do I do about pay?
So we are waiting for the final kind of green light on this from the government, but it's likely to come this weekend that they will ask people with health conditions to self-isolate for 12 weeks. In that instance, they would still be entitled to SSP from day one. Also remember though to check your contracts and see what your contracts say about sick pay, because there are companies who pay over and above SSP in normal circumstances. You need to work through that contract, and make a decision. Are you going to stick to your normal contractual sick pay, or is there a financial and valid reason why you need to revert to SSP? And in that instance, I would take advice from an ER professional.
Okay, we've got another question. What do we do if an employee with symptoms comes into work or do not self-isolate if members of their family are ill?
you need to be telling the employee that they need to self-isolate. This is the government guidance. It's not something that you or MorePay or anybody are enforcing. This is the government guidance that we have to follow. And it's important that we all do this. It's very challenging times that are ahead of us. But the information we are given is that the only way we are going to beat this is if people follow the advice that's been given and self-isolate to stem the spread of this.
Okay, another question. Can we delay new joiners' start date because of coronavirus?
Again, I would seek advice from an ER professional, but this is likely going to be a huge problem for people who have new starters starting the next few weeks. Now, think about what job they are coming in to do, whether it's a job that they can set themselves up from home and you can do some remote or virtual inductions with them. If you believe that they can't do the work from home, your operations are not, say, in an office, or there is a financial reason why you need to delay it, there is a possibility that you can do this, but again, make sure you seek advice. And the reason that we're saying seek advice is that so we can understand the details, or your ER professional can understand the details that sit behind your contract. But I imagine this will start to become a possibility.
Got another question. What happens if we are all on lockdown? How will payroll be processed?
From a MorePay perspective, we have been preparing for a home working or self-isolation lockdown scenario for a number of weeks now. And we have done testing of our operations working from home. And we know what core activities, both in payroll and for HR services, that we service our customers with, and we are fully prepared to continue processing payrolls even in the event of a lockdown.
Yeah, another question. Instead of letting employees work from home, the organisation is going to check people's temperatures in the morning. Is that enough to protect employees?
It's one solution I've seen out there. It's not one that I would be comfortable with without checking medical guidelines to give an advice on. There are people who are asymptomatic who can spread the disease, and the government has suggested that everybody works from home where it's possible. So my advice would be, if home working is possible, then home working be introduced. It might not be desirable, but if it's possible, then go with home working. There are obviously, as mentioned earlier, jobs where people can't work from home and they do need to come in, and taking temperatures might be a good precautionary measure in those, but where people can work from home, the government advises that they work from home.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how will we terminate a person's contract as a result of the virus?
I mean, this is becoming a stark reality at present, and on our HR advice line, we are being asked this numerous times a day. There are businesses who are seeing immediate impacts as a result of COVID-19. Again, we are working through each individual case, understanding what the contract is and how we can help them. But there are certain circumstances where we can actually allow for temporary layoffs while this is happening, with a view that they will come back into work. As the thing ramps up, we may now see redundancies, so it may happen. But again, it's going to be very specific on the instant at an issue at the time.
Okay, got another question. Apart from SSP starting from day one, all other calculations remain the same, right? The only change is that it starts from day one. For all other illnesses, other than COVID-19 related, we simply follow the regular SSP calculation. Probably one for John, if you wouldn't mind answering.
Yes, Dan, it is for COVID-19.
And all the other calculations remain the same?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We got another question. We have a new starter who hasn't had much training. How will they be able to work from home?
Again, that is really difficult if you have a new starter who doesn't have much training. At the moment, there isn't a mandate that people work from home, but you as a business should be preparing to move people from home If you do have people who still need to come into the office in the next few days or week or so, make sure that you follow all the guidelines around social distancing. If there are less people in the office, there's more room to spread people around so they're not sat next to each other, and follow good hygiene rules. But I think everyone needs to prepare that this could come a bit further down the line, that we are mandated to be at home in a lockdown situation. We don't know what's going to happen, and we will continue to monitor it, but it would be useful to prepare for that and think about how you can support a new starter virtually.
And yeah, I mean, there's things like that we use internally with new starters who are set on as home workers, and it's just using things like Microsoft Teams and screen sharing functionality to be able to train that person remotely. In the same way, a lot of training providers are moving from class-based training to webinar-based training to cover things, cover a lot of topics. The same kind of technologies and skills can be used to train up internal staff on internal processes.
Yeah, and as Phil said before, we know not all businesses have access to things like Microsoft Teams, but the majority of people will be able to access things like FaceTime or WhatsApp video calling. So try and be a bit creative with how you're doing, but I think it would be wise to be prepared.
Okay, we've got another question. We are really struggling with how we are expected to protect our staff in the workplace. We are a nursery. Do you have any tips for those in education settings which are not closing?
I think that there's no magic simple answer to that. My daughter's actually in the final year of her level 3 childcare, so this is a situation that's really close to home for myself personally. It really is down to catch it, bin it, kill it, or wash your hands. We know that kids in nurseries will be coughing and sneezing. We know that parents will be tempted to send their kids to nursery so they can go to work when the kids might not be in an ideal, healthy situation. The staff, you just need to use a lot of common sense, and like I say, just make sure that they're keeping a lot of hand discipline, washing their hands as often as possible, and that hard surfaces are being cleaned as often as possible.
I also think it's important that if you are in an education setting, whether that's a school or a nursery, that you are imposing the government guidelines on the children in that setting as well. So if they start to display any symptoms, I would recommend that you move them to a separate room. And I'm speaking from experience, as this is what's happening in my daughter's school at the moment, and the parents will be called to collect them and they will be expected to self-isolate. So that's something, I know it's awkward for parents, but this is a very unprecedented time and you would be well within your rights, and I would absolutely encourage you to be more forceful than normal, because that will ultimately help to protect your staff.
Yeah, and I think just one thing, viruses, they live on hard surfaces, but they do need moisture. So constant cleaning, removing any kind of moisture. The virus, really good cleaning disciplines at the end of the day, at the end of each session, will help reduce any potential cross-contamination from surfaces. But it's just really about cleaning as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question. What is the advice for construction workers? We have an office location and can control this environment. What advice is there for employees working outside?
Actually, the government guidance tends to indicate that outside workers are less at risk because you're in the open atmosphere and there are less hard surfaces around. Obviously, tools, the virus can be passed on if people are sharing tools or working on a similar surface or site huts. Pragmatic common sense comes into this, and I'm sure a lot of the principal contractors will be looking at this in some real detail. But at the moment, it's business as usual, but again, making sure that we've got good hygiene facilities on site. All construction sites by law have to have hand washing facilities, so just make sure people make the most of them.
Okay, thank you. I think we're probably going to leave it as one last one. We're unfortunately not going to get through them all, but we will come back to everyone with answers to your questions. But another one that I've seen probably crop up about 4 or 5 times now is it's probably one for John, but it's how are companies able to claim back SSP from the government?
Right. Oh, I've got an echo here, Dan.
Sorry, say that again.
I've got an echo on the system. I keep hearing myself.
Oh,
Yeah, we're all
Wait.
right. We can't hear the echo.
We can't hear the echo, so if you...
It's very off-putting, so apologies if I seem a little bit broken in what I'm saying here. The claim back has been something that the HMRC have said we're working with employers over weeks and months to come, and hopefully with software providers as well. It has been mentioned, but obviously the current mechanism is not in place to reclaim SSP, as you all know. So we've got to learn what that mechanism is going to be in the future.
Right, okay. Thanks, John.
Can I also point out, Dan, that there is guidance on the gov.uk website under DWP, who was giving coronavirus support for employees, benefit claimants and businesses. That was published on Friday.
I think the echo has been a bit challenging, and we're getting quite a few people saying that they can hear the echo. What we will do is post this webinar. I will send you the question, John, and if you can give me an answer to that, and I'll email everybody that's registered for the webinar with the answer to that question.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So apologies around that. A lot of people couldn't hear due to that echo. So I think we're going to end it now. We've gone over our half an hour slot. We are updating our knowledge centre. So if you go and visit our website, at the top, if you click on the knowledge centre up there, we're updating blogs. We've got business continuity guides on there. We're going to rerun this webinar next week and give a bit of an update as to what the situation is in a week's time. Again, it might have all changed. What's the guidance? We're also probably going to touch upon employee wellbeing. We know that it's the next topic that people are asking around, especially as we're asking employees to work from home. So we will put on a webinar next week. We will send round an invite again, and if you can join, that'd be great. If you can't, then we will put a recording on. Anybody that's missed our webinars that we've done the past two weeks, if you go on our website again in the Knowledge Centre, you'll see the recordings. You can watch the recordings on there. As Michelle mentioned, all of our HR services customers that are on the line, if you've got any further issues, if you've got any burning questions you need to get answered now, pick up the phone, speak to the advice line. For any prospects that have been on here and been on the webinar and past webinars, hopefully you've got an understanding for the level of guidance that we've been offering. We've jumped on the situation really quickly, kind of one step ahead of the rest, really. If you're interested in finding out a bit more around our service and getting access to our advice line, if you pop a question in the box, I can certainly get one of our representatives to speak to you about that as well. So I'd like to thank you for joining today. Thank you for Michelle, John and Phil for answering the questions and going through the information, and hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.